Thanks, Peter. All right, so we're going to dive into TCFD today. This topic is broad and big, so as far as the agenda, we could talk for hours on just this alone. But if we just click to the next slide here, we're going to spend most of our time, do a little bit of overview, but most of our time in the second to last. What does TCFD really mean for you as an organization? What do these recommendations mean for that kind of implementation? So this topic, is, as Donovan and Peter have said, we're kind of progressing through. This is a little bit more of an advanced topic, diving in a little deeper, more likely for those who have been kind of reporting for the last 1 to 2 years or so. But a lot of content, so we're going to cruise through this. So just real briefly, who is SBC? Why do we get to speak to this today? We've been around for since 2007 about here in the US, led nearly 250 clients through their ESG storytelling, everything from gathering that data, benchmarking up to your strategy. Where are we going? Where's your strategy? And how do we then talk about that? How do we report that publicly? Lots of different industries. So we're well versed in a lot of these kind of regulations, and but really, again, coming down to how do we implement this then? What does this mean for us? So just briefly on TCFD, if we're not aware, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Essentially what we're looking at here is at its core, climate-related risks and opportunities and what they mean to our company. So we're going to talk less today about, how do you craft these disclosures in line with the TCFD recommendations. So not as much on, what does the actual report look like. We're going to just really spend more of our time on what actions are expected of companies in order to then be able to create that report. So what do we need to do in order to have an impressive TCFD report and speak to these recommendations? So happy to, as we move on here, these slides will be shared, so don't feel like you need to scratch anything down. But also happy to be available for individual follow-up if you're embarking on this journey and you do want to talk more about the actual reporting of this and what it looks like. Okay, so who is aligning to TCFD today? Gabriella just spoke to several countries who are mandating this type of disclosure, but when we look at the company side of things, the reality is this type of disclosure really started in the financial services industry. So, looking at what is your exposure to risks at being, a holding company or being that institutional investor. So BlackRock, of course, for most of us, we know that they are the biggest supporter behind TCFD, and they're pushing most of their investments to move in this direction. But just like, all things happen in ESG, the ones that are being asked to report and disclose this information are saying, well, hey, it'd be a lot easier if we just asked our companies to tell us what our risks are, to tell us. So they're pushing that down through their supply chain. And that's where we see, the Marist, the JetBlues, the GMs, all these companies that have BlackRock investors, State Street, whoever, they are the ones that are now being asked to report to this in order to inform the then disclosure of the institutional investors. So just bringing it kind of that world back together. Gabrielle also spoke to the SEC. We know that they are expected to release their disclosure guidance by March 31, is what they're sharing, and that will likely draw heavily from TCFD. So that is the expectation, and that's why we want to focus on that today. Okay, so here's our section on what does TCFD mean for your organization. If we can click through to the next couple of slides. So for this section, really just giving you that overview of what the recommendations mean. And then with that, so we're going to go there, and then I'm also going to show you some examples from GM, just so we can really, demonstrate and understand what we're talking about here when I bring up each of these points. So expect that to come. I also have the disclosures on the left. So just to ground our conversation, those will just be there for reference, but I'll really be speaking to the right side of most of these slides. So the governance side, I mean, careful to note here that that we're, I mentioned here that most of us now have a role dedicated to ESG. Gabriela said this as well. I want to be careful to note that this does not necessarily mean that you have a dedicated role, but is specifically a role dedicated to ESG. So that, while it's changing, and I would agree that we're moving in that direction to chief ESG or so, that we're really looking at least someone who's responsible for reporting all of this. Thanks to those who are mentioning the background noise. What's different for TCFD, what I really want to speak to here is that, this expectation is so much bigger. We are talking about board management and interfacing all the way up and down your levels of your organization. So what the TCFD is really asking us to do in their recommendations is reevaluate our existing structures, get real with our boards, get real about the realities of climate, and not really dance around the conversation anymore. So the expectation is that this is managed as if it is a material impact to your business. So an example from GM, just click through here. So what they do is really provide a great job. And again, this is, just glance at it. This will be shared with you so you can really digest it later. But what they do is really provide details around board governance, how their board committees are involved. And it goes all the way down, management down to, you see at the very bottom, local management. It's very specific to the responsibilities of each of these groups. As well as showing, the time-bound aspect of this annual multi-day session, or as you look through frequent ESG strategic discussions. So that's what we want to highlight here. As far as the next disclosure on strategy, what we're looking at here is that really you may. We think that as you've been reporting for a while, you think, okay, strategy, I've got this, right? But really the script here from TCFD is flipped. So so many companies, yes, we're discussing our strategy for reducing our impact on climate. But the difference with TCFD is that we're really looking at what is climate's impact on us? And this is the aspect that I want to stress the most with this TCFD reporting recommendation, is that we're changing the way that we talk about climate. And yes, absolutely, our actions to reduce our own impacts are still important for sure. But TCFD is saying, yeah, but there's more to the story. So some of these strategies, they're unintentional. Maybe we're putting investments in low carbon technology, or maybe some of us have even thought about or introduced voluntary carbon pricing. But these may be unintentional in the way that they're addressing this new recommendation on TCFD. So typically we kind of see that omission of transitional risks like that in our strategies. So just expecting to engage different stakeholders on your strategy, may be different than what you usually do when you come through your ESG reporting on an annual basis. And it's just adjusting that narrative. Thanks all. So GM's case study here. What we see is, that they're not holding on to business as usual. And that's what I want to highlight. So to that point on discussing strategy, yes, they have specific risks here. They're looking at time horizon, likelihood, all the things that TCFD is asking for, but what the content of it that's most important is that they're really investing in they're investing in EVs. They're investing in the next generation. They're not holding on to business as usual, and they're preparing for those regulatory shifts and those consumer changes that's expected. So again, what these changes mean to us and how we as a company are going to approach that. Thanks. On risk management, this is an area where, as you look at the disclosures, you probably think, well, gosh, if I've reported to CDP once, well, I've already, looked at these, I've looked at the opportunities, I've checked out the risks. But TCFD really, again, goes kind of beyond that and asks to really integrate with your company fabric. And we've already heard today, thanks, Gabriela, that these disclosures will eventually converge with financial reporting. That's exactly what we're seeing writing on the wall. And so the expectation is that we're restructuring our annual reporting, we're training our employees, we are really managing this, as I said, kind of as a core material topic. A good example of this is cybersecurity. Several years ago was not, in the boardrooms. We weren't talking about this at the management level. We weren't, we didn't have a lot of governance around this, and it's become more and more and more core to our businesses. As a GM example here, again, the overall purpose is saying, hey, we are informing our stakeholders of how our company is positioning ourselves in light of these risks and opportunities. So what GM does is that they describe really where climate sits in the spectrum of company risks, and they really talk through the importance of describing this, but being honest. Client who isn't really affected too much fiscally necessarily from a financial perspective by these physical transitional changes, that might be fine. We do have a client that speaks to that. That might be fine to understand once you go through this process that actually this isn't a core material topic to our business, and but the expectation is that we kind of do our due diligence and we know that, and then we can claim that. Finally, here we move into metrics and targets. Thanks everyone for just cruising through this with me. There's a lot to say and little time to say it. But finally, coming into the metrics part of the conversation here, you may think that, again, we've been reporting to GRI, SASB, CDP that we've got these metrics under control. Likely we may, but the sophistication, it really changes. So one, are our goals aligned with science-based targets? We don't just have a goal, but we're actually aligning to SBTs and achieving that framework for our organization and really setting that in motion. Similarly, are we tracking data with Excel sheets still? Are we, how integrated is this into our organization? I know that Benchmark ESG here can share their ESG director if you're not familiar with it, but really just bringing up that the capabilities of your data tracking up to the level of the way that if this gets integrated into financial reporting, how are we going to ensure and assure that data in a sophisticated way over time. So for GM here, just a good example, they actually, this is just a small amount. You can actually go look at their full report. There's a lot more here, but they do align with SBTI, and they're tracking, this data and other water, waste, lots of other metrics, partly due to their size. They have, very sophisticated measures of data here, size and complexity, but the other piece of that is that they're expected to report accurately and on an annual basis. So, thinking about something like, if somebody asked us, could you disclose how much climate change cost you last year? Essentially that's what TCFD is asking. Could we look at our data and say, yes, we understand that our insurance premiums rose. We understand that we had change in extreme heat and wildfires, and that did X to our supply chain, right? So it's looking at this now so that come next year or the following year, you can really report to it. So speaking of looking ahead, given all this data, the expectations in 2022 and beyond. So what do we do this year if this is right in front of us? What I want to speak to here is that what we're really still seeing is these TCFD light type reports, especially if you're a first time TCFD reporter. So this can be, either just an index that's in your ESG report, can also be a standalone, but often short and often, more of a representation of what currently exists and not necessarily too much change or too much sophistication beyond what you've already been reporting. However, I will say that there are expectations that anything that we are reporting into the TCFD recommendations on a voluntary basis, we are also representing those types of disclosures in our annual filings as well. So important note there, just again, consistency, that this is not just a silo, this is not just one part of an organization, that it's really beyond that, and it goes deep through the organization and across silos, so that we're representing that in our annual filings. Looking beyond that, sorry, one more thing, and I know we're coming up here on time. So looking beyond that, really the change there is that we start to do more in-depth scenario planning and financial modeling. So we're moving into that space of looking at the data, really understanding at those plausible future states and what they might mean for our organization, and what are our responses to that. So really it's a kind of full integration, a lot deeper than where we've been before. And with that, I will pause. Thank you, everyone, for cruising through that. And if we have any time for Q&A, and otherwise, pass it back to the Benchmark ESG team.